My name is Diana Marsh. I'm 31 years old. And the Thanksgiving my father raised his glass to my little app in front of 11 people was the night I understood that some rooms were never going to change and that I had already stopped needing them to. He said it with warmth. That was the part that took the longest to name accurately. He lifted his glass, the good crystal, the ones my mother only brought out for holidays, and he looked down the table at me and said, "Here's to Diana and her little app." The word little landed the way it always landed. Affectionate, dismissive, both at once, the way only a father can manage. Everyone chuckled. My aunt set down her fork to reach for her glass. My uncle nodded with the particular slow approval of a man confirming something he already believed. My sister Claire said, from across the table, "Maybe someday you'll make back what you spent on that laptop." She said it lightly, the way you say something you've been saving. My mother put her hand over mine on the tablecloth. "We just worry, honey," she said. I lifted my own glass and drank. I did not correct anyone. I did not explain the metrics I had been watching for 6 weeks, or the email sitting in my inbox from a partnership coordinator at a company whose logo was on every phone in that room. I looked at my father's face. Open, proud in his particular way, the way he was proud of things he didn't quite understand. And I made a decision I had been approaching for months without naming it. I was going to let it be a surprise. What none of them knew, what I had told no one at that table, or anywhere else, was that the laptop Claire was counting the cost of had already returned $340,000 in licensing revenue. And that was before the call I was expecting in 11 days. I grew up in the kind of house where capability was assumed for boys and encouraged but gently redirected for girls. My father, Robert Marsh, had built a regional plumbing supply business over 32 years in Akron, Ohio. He was a self-made man in the specific sense that he used that phrase about himself with some frequency and believed it with complete sincerity. He had started with a van, a price sheet, and a territory no one else wanted, and he had turned it into a company with 41 employees and 3 warehouse locations. He was not a man who dismissed hard work. He was a man who had a fixed picture of what hard work looked like, and anything that didn't fit the picture registered to him as a hobby. My brother Evan had gone into the business after college, which was the plan the family had organized itself around for as long as I could remember. My sister Claire had married a contractor and managed the books for his firm, which was practical and nearby and legible. I had studied computer science at Carnegie Mellon, graduated with a 3.91 GPA, and taken a software engineering position at a mid-sized SaaS company in Pittsburgh called Vantril Systems, which was responsible and well-compensated, and which my father described to people as the tech thing Diana does. The app was not the tech thing Diana did. The app was the other thing. I had started building it during a particularly slow quarter at Vantril, on a problem I kept running into personally. I managed my own finances across 4 accounts, 2 investment platforms, and a freelance income stream that arrived irregularly, and every tool I tried to use either oversimplified the picture or required a spreadsheet degree to operate. I wanted something that behaved the way a thoughtful person would, that could hold complexity without demanding that you become an accountant to use it. I built the first version in 4 months, working evenings and Saturdays in the second bedroom of my apartment that I used as an office. I called it Ledger. Not a clever name. A name that said what it was. The first version was rough. I knew it was rough. I put it in the App Store in March of the year I turned 28 with a free tier and a $6.99 monthly subscription option, and a description I had rewritten 11 times. I told no one in my family, partly because I had learned to save announcements for things I could point to, and partly because I did not yet know what I had. What I had, it turned out, was a retention rate. The metric that matters in consumer software is not downloads. Downloads are vanity. What matters is whether people come back, whether they open the app on a Tuesday 3 weeks after they downloaded it on a Sunday, whether the thing becomes part of how they move through their week. Most apps, the overwhelming majority, are opened twice and forgotten. Ledger's 30-day retention in the first cohort was 61%. My Vantril colleague Priya Subramaniam, who had been building consumer products for 9 years and who I had asked to look at my numbers with the honest instruction to tell me if I was misreading them, looked at the spreadsheet for a long moment and then looked at me and said, "Diana, this is not normal." Priya became the first person outside my apartment who knew what was happening. She was a senior product manager with a background in fintech, and she understood the numbers in a way I needed someone to understand them, not to validate the excitement, but to pressure test it. She found two things I had miscounted and corrected them. The corrected retention was 58%. Still not normal. Over the following 8 months, I did 4 things. I rebuilt the subscription model from $6.99 to a tiered structure with a free floor, a $9.99 personal tier, and a $24.99 household tier that I added after 3 separate users emailed me asking if their spouse could share the account. I hired a part-time UI contractor named Sol Reyes, who spent 6 weeks making the interface do what I had always wanted it to do, but hadn't had the design vocabulary to execute. I answered every support email personally, which was time-consuming and which taught me more about the product than anything else I could have done. And I filed a provisional patent application on the core categorization logic with an intellectual property attorney named Cassandra Ewan, who had been recommended by Priya and who billed at $375 an hour and who told me, after reviewing the filing, that the methodology had a defensible claim. The provisional patent filing cost $4,200. I paid it from savings. By the second Thanksgiving, the one where my father raised his glass the first time, 2 years before the Thanksgiving in question, Ledger had 14,000 active subscribers. I knew this was meaningful. I also knew it was not yet a story anyone outside a specific professional context would recognize as meaningful, and so I said nothing. My father asked how the tech thing was going. I said it was going well. He said that was good and passed the cranberry sauce. The third Thanksgiving, the one I opened with, the one with the good crystal and the word little, Ledger had 89,000 active subscribers, $340,000 in trailing 12-month revenue, and an ongoing conversation with a partnership team at Apple that had begun 6 weeks earlier when a developer relations coordinator named James Takahashi had reached out through my registered developer account to ask if I would be willing to discuss a potential editorial feature. I had been on 3 calls with James by the time I sat down at my parents' table. The feature, if it went forward, would place Ledger in the App of the Day slot on the App Store front page, a position that, according to every data point I had studied, produced between 40,000 and 300,000 downloads in the first 48 hours depending on category and seasonality. The personal finance category, James had told me without committing to any specific projection, tended toward the higher end of that range. I had not told anyone at that table any of this. I lifted my glass when my father lifted his. I drank. I watched Claire count the cost of the laptop from across the table with the comfortable arithmetic of someone who has already concluded what the answer is. I watched my mother's hand on mine, the particular pressure of it, the specific warmth of concern that has never quite separated itself from doubt. And I thought, 11 days. I drove back to Pittsburgh that Sunday evening, and I called Priya from the car, hands-free, the Ohio Interstate flat, and dark on either side. "How was Thanksgiving?" she asked. "Dad did the toast again," I said. A pause. "The little app toast. The little app toast." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. 11 days, she said. 11 days, I said. This was the shorthand we had developed over the previous 6 weeks. It required no further elaboration. We talked for 40 minutes about the feature placement, about the support infrastructure I needed to have in place before the traffic spike, about whether I needed to bring on a part-time customer support contractor before the launch date. Priya had connections at a firm that did fractional product support for indie developers. She made an introduction that week to a coordinator named Brendan Cole, who came in for 12 hours a week starting December 1st. I also, in that same week, had a 90-minute call with Cassandra Ewan about what the feature placement would mean for the patent filing timeline and whether we needed to accelerate any of the documentation. We did not need to accelerate. The provisional was solid. Cassandra's advice was to wait and see what the feature produced, and then make the full filing decision from a stronger position. I went back to work at Vantrol. I answered support emails. I fixed 2 bugs that Sol had flagged in the latest build. I updated the App Store listing copy, which James had advised me to tighten before the feature window. I did not call my family. The App of the Day feature went live on a Wednesday morning at midnight Pacific time, which was 3 a.m. Eastern, which meant that when I woke up at 6:30 and looked at my phone, The notification queue had been running for 3.5 hours. I had set up a dashboard the previous week. Priya had helped me configure it. That pulled download counts, subscription conversions, and revenue in real time. I opened it standing at my bathroom sink, still in the clothes I had slept in, which was not how I had imagined this moment, but was how it arrived. In 3.5 hours, 34,000 downloads, 4,100 new paid subscribers, $38,000 in new subscription revenue, gross. I stood at the bathroom sink for a while. Then I washed my face, made coffee, and opened my laptop to check the support queue, because 34,000 new users in 3.5 hours meant the support queue needed checking. The Apple feature banner was real. I could see it in the App Store on my phone, Ledger across the front page in the editorial slot, with the description James's team had written. The personal finance app that thinks the way you do. Under the banner, Editor's Choice. Under that, the category rank. Ledger had moved from position 340 in finance to position 4 in the time I had been asleep. My phone began ringing at 7:14 a.m. It was not my father. It was Priya, who had been awake since 4, monitoring the dashboard and who said, "You're at 41,000. I told her I knew. She said, "Diana, you need to call a lawyer today." I told her Cassandra was already on my calendar for 10 a.m. The call with Cassandra at 10 a.m. was about the full patent filing, which we decided to initiate immediately given the public visibility the feature had created. The cost of the full utility patent application, attorney fees, USPTO filing fees, the associated documentation, came to $9,400. I authorized it on the call. By end of day Wednesday, 89,000 downloads, 11,200 new paid subscribers. Position 1 in finance. Position 12 overall in the App Store, across all categories. James Takahashi sent an email at 4:47 p.m. that said, "Exceptional performance. The team is very pleased." From James, in my experience of James, this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. I sent him a 2-sentence reply, closed my laptop, and went for a run. My father called at 8:22 that evening. I was back from the run, showered, eating dinner at my kitchen table with the dashboard still open on my laptop because I had not yet found a natural moment to close it. His name came up on my screen and I looked at it for one ring, just one, and then I answered, "Diana." His voice had the particular quality it had when he was working toward something. "I saw something online today." "Did you?" I said. "About your app." A pause. "It's on the front page of Apple." "It is," I said. Another pause, longer. I heard him exhale, not dramatically, just the particular sound a man makes when he is recalibrating something. That's something, Diana. That's really something. Thank you, Dad. I want you to know, he said, and here his voice shifted into the register he used for things he had decided in advance to say, "I always believed in you. I always knew you had something." I looked at the dashboard on my laptop. The download counter was still moving. "I know you did," I said. It was the kindest thing I could offer him, and it was also the truest thing that was available that didn't require either of us to revisit the Thanksgiving table, the good crystal, the word little landing warm and dismissive across the holiday tablecloth. He had believed in me in the way he understood how to believe in people, which was in the way that asked them to be legible and nearby, and not to need too much. That was its own kind of care. It was just not the kind that had built what I had built. We talked for 17 minutes. He asked how the numbers worked, downloads, subscribers, the revenue model. I explained it to him the way I had learned to explain it to people who hadn't grown up in the language, simply, with comparisons he could hold on to. He asked good questions. My father had always asked good questions once he understood what he was asking about. Before we hung up, he said, "I'm sorry I called it a little project." "It was a little project," I said. "For a while." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Fair enough." Claire texted the following morning. The text said, "Saw the Apple thing. That's huge. Proud of you." I replied with a thank you. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji and then, 20 minutes later, "Can I ask, what does app of the day actually mean for, money?" I told her I would explain it sometime when we had more than a text thread. She said that sounded good. She did not follow up. My mother called that Friday. Her call was different from my father's, less structured, more searching, the way she moved through things she hadn't prepared for. She said she'd had no idea. She said she wished I had told her. I told her, gently, that there hadn't been much to tell until there was. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she understood, in the way she said she understood things she was still working through. I worry about you, Diana, she said. Up there alone in Pittsburgh, working on things we don't know about. I know you do, I said. And you're doing well. I'm doing well, I said. The silence on the line had a particular quality, not awkward, not unresolved, but the kind of silence that holds more than it says. My mother had loved me with a loyalty that had never quite separated from anxiety, and I had understood this about her for a long time, and it had made me neither bitter nor dependent. It had made me careful, which had turned out to be useful. We talked for 22 minutes. I told her about Priya, about Soul, about the support infrastructure, about the things that had gone right, and the things I had had to rebuild twice. She listened in a way she had not listened when the app was a laptop expense and a worry. People listen differently when the outcome is known. This is not a criticism. It is just true. The 90 days following the Apple feature were the most operationally complex of my professional life. Downloads over the feature window totaled 340,000. Paid conversion settled at 12.4%, which Priya told me was roughly double the industry benchmark for personal finance apps in the post-feature decay period. New annual recurring revenue from the feature cohort alone came to $3.1 million. I will say that number once here because it is what it is, and then I will move past it because the number is not the story. The number is the outcome of 6 years of evenings and Saturdays and support emails and a UI contractor and a patent attorney and a product manager who looked at a spreadsheet and told me the truth. The number is what happens when the thing you built is the thing people needed. It is not separate from the work. It is the work. I gave notice at Vantrol in January. My manager, a director named Patrick Osei, had known something was coming. I had been honest with him in the previous quarter about the trajectory, and the conversation was professional and, on his end, genuinely warm. He said he hoped I'd consider Vantrol as a future partnership when Ledger was in a position where that made sense. I told him I would keep it in mind. I hired Sol Reyes full-time in February. I brought on a second engineer, a developer named Kofi Asante, in March. Cassandra Yuen's firm filed the full utility patent in February, and the application was accepted into examination without an initial rejection, which Cassandra described as a favorable sign. I moved to a larger apartment in Pittsburgh in the spring, still the same neighborhood, still the same running route I had been doing for 4 years, the route that took me past the coffee shop where I had done most of the first version's architecture on Saturday mornings, the one with the table in the corner that I had quietly come to think of as mine. I did not move out of Pittsburgh. I had been asked by more than one person in more than one context whether I was going to relocate to San Francisco. I considered it for approximately 1 week and then decided no. The work was here. The running route was here. The corner table was here. The following Thanksgiving was at my apartment. This had not been the plan. The plan, as it had been for my entire adult life, was for me to drive to Akron. But my father had called in October, the same directness he used for business conversations, which I found I had come to appreciate, and said, "Diana, I think we should come to you this year." He said it as though it were obvious, as though this were a thing that had always been available, and we had simply not gotten to it yet.
I said that would be fine.
My mother and father arrived Wednesday evening. Claire and her husband drove up Thursday morning. My aunt and uncle, the same aunt who had set down her fork, the same uncle who had nodded, sent a gift and a card and their regrets, which was honestly fine with me. I cooked. I am a competent cook. This is not a revelation, just a fact. And I made the things I knew how to make well rather than attempting anything ambitious. My kitchen table seated 6 if everyone was comfortable with proximity, which my family was, being that kind of family. My father did not raise a glass to the little app. He did, at some point during the meal, ask Kofi's name again. I had mentioned Kofi in a previous call, and my father was the kind of man who wanted to keep the name straight, who understood that names were how you tracked things that mattered to you. I told him. He nodded and filed it away. After dinner, While my mother and Claire were in the kitchen and my father was helping me clear the table, he stopped next to me with a stack of plates and said, quietly, without looking up, "You knew what you were doing the whole time." It was not a question. "Most of the time," I said. He looked at me then directly, the way he looked at things he was deciding to take seriously.
"More than most," he said.
I took the plates from him and carried them to the kitchen. The full utility patent was granted 11 months after filing. Cassandra called me with the confirmation on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in a product review with Sol and Kofi. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. She read me the patent number. I wrote it in the small notebook I kept in my jacket pocket, a habit I had developed at Carnegie Mellon and never lost, and I thanked her and went back into the product review. Sol and Kofi looked at me when I came back in.
"Patent granted," I said.
Sol put his hands flat on the table. Kofi closed his laptop and opened it again. "Okay," Sol said. "Okay." We finished the product review. There is a thing that happens when you build something in private for long enough. You stop needing the moment when other people see it. Not because the moment doesn't matter. It does. It is real. It lands with a weight you don't entirely predict, but because by the time it arrives, you have already lived so far inside the work that the outside view is a supplement, not a foundation. My father called my app a little project for 3 Thanksgivings. He said it with warmth. He meant it as love, in the specific shape love takes when it doesn't quite know what it's looking at. I did not correct him. I went home and kept building. That was the whole answer. It was not dramatic. It did not require a speech or a confrontation or a particular moment of vindication. It required showing up on Saturday morning, opening the laptop, and doing the next thing. The approval arrived when it arrived. I accepted it. I even found, to my mild surprise, that I was glad for it, not because I had needed it to continue, but because it turned out I did not need to need it in order to receive it. That is a different thing than indifference.
I want to be precise about that. It is not that it didn't matter.
It is that it did not have to matter first. Build the thing. Know what you have. Let the rest arrive in its own time, or not. Either way, the work is yours. There's a moment in this story that I keep thinking about, when my dad called that Wednesday evening and said he'd always believed in me, while the download counter was still moving on my laptop. If you've ever been in a room, or on a phone call, where someone arrived late to believing in you, what did you say back? I'm curious. Leave it in the comments. If this story stayed with you, hit like and subscribe. I put out a new story every week, and the notification bell means you won't miss the next one. Thank you for being here.